Hi, I'm Michael Killen, and I'm host of the Killen Report. And I heard the voice of the children. I heard it clearly in the last few weeks. It is the children around the world who are now calling out for climate action now. And when the children speak, it should be a sign that something significant has happened. They have recognized that this force of climate change is real and it's dangerous, and we should now start acting a little differently as a result of this new group of people who are calling for action. I have invited Ripudaman Malhotra. He is a scientist with tremendous credentials to come on this program, and I want to ask him some questions about how severe is climate change, and most important, what solution do we have to help slow that great force. Now, Ripu is the author of A Cubic Mile of Oil. Actually, in the last 2 weeks, I've been reading that book again. It is so rich with insights about the world's need for energy and its intensity and what we can get out of it and why we need it and what do we need it for. He is also a fellow from SRI, and SRI, ironically, is the massive, large research organization that invited me to come to California from Massachusetts. Ripu, thank you for being here.
Michael, pleasure. Thank you.
And I also recall you are a fellow from the American Chemical Association. Society.
Yeah.
And that's the biggie.
That's the biggie.
That
was last year, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you heard me say that the children now have joined the choir to call for climate change action.
Yeah.
And I think that is significant, I really do. But on the other hand, I look around and I look, for example, at California's climate change goals. And one of them is to double the renewable electricity production in the state. And I look at the French plans. They're also talking about increasing the share of the country for renewable energy. And I feel that the world is grabbing onto this. Renewable energy will be the silver bullet to slow climate change. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's somewhat misguided, to put it mildly. I want to address one thing you mentioned about the children, their thing, and it's really important for us to hear them. But we also should be taking actions that can really solve the problem. When I wrote the book about 10 years ago, or 12 years ago now, one of the things that came to me at that time was the realization that, and it was rather humbling to realize that there was nothing I could do at that point to affect the life of my grandson. I could look at him and say, oh my God, his climate is going to be really affected. But that climate change, what I was thinking about, was perhaps more of an inconvenience. Now I'm looking at really catastrophic changes, potential possibilities. And the time to act is now, for sure. And so those voices of children are absolutely important that we heed them.
Catastrophic impacts.
Yeah.
Like, what do you consider? Like the floods going all down the Midwest?
Worse than that.
Tell me about some
extinction, complete extinction is
extinction of civilization.
Yes.
You think it's really possible?
It's under some scenarios, that's where we are headed. And that won't happen in 10, 15, 20 years. No, that'll be a few centuries. But that's what happens when there is a tipping point and you go beyond the tipping point.
Few centuries? Wow.
Yes.
But what about right now in our lifetime?
So these are the floods and the droughts and the hurricanes and all those things.
Tornadoes, cyclones.
You name it.
And
you name it. And because of that, there's been mass disruption in the population. Some islands, some low-lying areas, they're going to get, and people will be displaced. And so these are also hardships.
So right now we are feeling the impact of climate change.
We are.
And as a scientist, you will agree, it seems like the impacts that are coming our way are going to increase rapidly and maybe more severely. Is that your...
If we do not change our way.
Okay.
If we do not change if we continue on the trajectory that we are, and we end up having 4 degrees, 5 degrees Celsius rise in the global average temperatures, very drastic things can happen.
Yes.
And there are feedback loops. Why does it get catastrophic? Because there's so much of permafrost and methane that is locked in there. Once that starts to come out because of warming, it causes even more warming, and then we don't know. Well, there are too many uncertainties to be, but it's not worth taking that risk.
Okay, so we have a silver bullet, renewable energy. Am I right?
It is so seductive.
It's seductive.
It is seductive.
What's that mean?
It looks so beautiful, you know. Oh gosh, there's nothing. Once you put up a windmill, the sun's going to cause the wind to blow, and you don't have to put in any coal, you don't have to put in any fuel. You have done it once, and you put a solar panel, done it once. All right, so in 20 years I'll have to replace it. That's okay, but that's all. On a day-to-day basis, you are not doing anything to it. It's just producing electricity for you. Where the problem comes is when you try to add the numbers up. What is the demand of electricity going to be? How are we going to run our society based on the we use energy for so many things. That's what we use. We have either relied on animals or slaves or somebody else, because we alone cannot provide all the energy we need. Otherwise, we are just subsistence level hunter-gatherers. We were fine.
So, if this is the energy needs of the United States or the world, and if everyone put solar panels on their roofs, on factories, on government buildings, wouldn't that provide enough energy to meet this worldwide? No?
So proponents of the all renewables have actually given us some numbers. You can look at their numbers also. And we can also make it very simply if you plan for, say, 9 billion people by 2050, and each one requires so much energy, about 1,000 gallons of oil worth of energy. I do everything in oil units. That was the book. Well, it turns out to be about 100,000 terawatt hours a year.
The world's need
100,000 terawatt hours.
All right.
So to get that, now it depends on what you use. I mean, something producing energy all the time or part of the time. So that's the capacity factor. So for windmills, it's about 30%, 25% or so for solar. So you can take those things into account and say, well, how many windmills and how many solar and all that will I need? And you will see that it gets awfully difficult.
You've done the arithmetic.
I have. If I look at, I have done the arithmetic. I've also looked at the arithmetic of the people who have proposed these things, and looked at, the amount of materials needed for the windmills. It's about 450 tons of steel for every megawatt. Now we're going to be installing about 20 terawatts of this. And for steel, it's also about 1,600 tons of steel per megawatt of solar power. So you add this all up, and to get a system, as they have described, we will be requiring about 25 billion tons of steel just to get up to the capacity. You assume, let's say it takes you 10 years to build this, so it means 2.5 billion tons of steel. and ask the question, how much steel are we producing today? It's less than that. Yeah. So you have to not only start building this, but you have to start building mining of steel. You have to increase that, almost double that or more than that, to make enough steel for the current uses and this additional use.
Have the environmentalists thought about that? Have they thought about a new resurgence in mining and all the trucks and equipment and all the greenhouse gases that come up in the process of mining and preparing the materials to make steel and other things? Have the environmentalists thought of that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. Because whenever I looked at for this or the copper or the use of aluminum, I mean, these are all energy or concrete, energy intensive processes to produce. And look at the global commodity supply chain, and you will be straining them like anything, or sometimes you have to double them, or there's so much demand that you will have to put in to get to that level. And then they have a lifetime of 15 years or 20, 25 years or something. So you have to constantly be building, you have to be replacing it all the time. So producing steel, you produce 2 tons of CO2 for every ton of steel that you produce. So it ends up having a fairly large environmental footprint, even on the basis of carbon.
Okay. And I know you're very concerned with part of this, a good part of civilization right now does not have...
Half the world does not have adequate electricity supply.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they want it.
Of course they want to live this lifestyle that way.
Will the solar panels and the wind give us...
In principle, yes. In principle, yes, they can produce enough. In principle, yes. But in practice, I don't see that happening. And there is another part to it, which is the storage. Where are we going to get the storage? Because wind and solar are produced when the wind blows or when the sun shines. There are long periods of time when they are not there, and we have not added the cost of that at all in this.
What is the status, I don't know if you looked at it recently, of batteries? Are batteries still down the road?
Environmentally, they are just awful at the moment.
Awful. And the chemicals, ingredients as we need for batteries, they're pretty much controlled by the Chinese also?
No, not by the Chinese. Lithium is the one that you need. That's in South America, a fairly large amount. But we have the market hasn't been there very large, so it can scale up. I think it's not unheard of. Once the demand rises, they could start more mining and we could do more things. But for the windmills, yes, it requires magnets that are the rare earths that is nearly 100% controlled by the Chinese at the moment.
Yeah. And
nowhere else is that available.
So am I correct? And with the renewable energy, it's a weather dependent and the time of day, when the sun sets or the wind blows or the rain or whatever, or the sun goes away, things happen that are not good. So I'm just wondering what is an alternative to all of... Well, before I ask that question, isn't the issue today not generating energy from renewables, but generating clean energy? Am I correct?
You're absolutely right. What the world needs is lots and lots of energy, but clean energy.
Why must it be clean today?
Because the amount that the CO2 that we end up producing by burning coal or natural gas or whatever, adds to that's the greenhouse gas. That's what's causing the climate change to a very large extent. And there's no denying in the amount of carbon dioxide that has gone up in the air. We have seen that, and that has caused the temperature of the world to rise. It's not surprising that it would have. But the extent of it and getting it, that's been the challenge.
So am I correct? So manufacturing all the windmills, all the solar panels that are needed is a process
a huge environmental impact.
Terrible impact.
Yeah.
And then when we use those devices, they're also putting more greenhouse gases up. Am I correct? Because you have to have backups for them.
Exactly, that depends on the backup, because the most easy way that we have right now for integrating the wind and solar into the grid is by having a natural gas plant, a peaking plant, sitting, waiting. As soon as the thing goes down, in a very short time sometimes, very short period of time, you have to spin it up and make up for that power, or otherwise your grid becomes very unstable. Because we don't have battery storage to scale. You know, the big gigafactories that you need lots and lots of those gigafactories to do maybe a few hours. Right now, the whole Australian thing that they built could do maybe for a few minutes or something of the supply that they need. It's orders of magnitude away. I don't have the number in my head right now.
That's okay.
But yeah, so the environmental footprints of the renewables is very large, and it is often not counted as well. And it's okay to use it when you don't have a grid, when you're trying to serve a population that is not being serviced today, and you want to get them power very quickly. Sure, go ahead, put up a panel, put up some windmills over there, and you will immediately see the impact on the quality of life of the people to improve.
Okay.
But if you want to run industries and factories and all that, you need solid supply.
Okay. And now the Democrats have this new Green Deal, which I think I've heard the word renewable, renewable, renewable.
Yeah.
Are they a little...
So, a couple of points for that. Number one, they are focusing only on the US, so they're looking at just the US doing it. But climate change is not the US phenomenon, okay? Climate change is a global phenomenon. So US could perhaps, you know, with our thing, maybe, even if we did it, if the rest of the world didn't do it, we would still suffer all the consequences of it. In the Green New Deal, they talk about, whenever people ask about the cost, they say, well, what about the cost that we are putting in right now combating the
floods?
It's enormous cost.
Sure.
Though it's not like those costs are going to disappear if you put this in. Those costs are going to still be there if the rest of the world doesn't follow. I need solutions that scale to the world situation. See, these things have very low energy density. So that's why you need so much more materials.
Yes. Yeah.
And the real advantage of, or even combustion sources, you know, they have so much energy density. In the history of human civilization, we have gone for more and more energy dense, in general, more and more energy dense systems. Biomass to coal to oil, things like that. That's been the trajectory. Or nuclear. Now, nuclear really gets you millions of times more energy density. And that's why you need very few materials. Yes. It has a very low environmental footprint, and you could produce gobs and gobs of energy to meet the global need.
I'm glad you brought up nuclear, but before we go any further, let me just see. We should keep making some wind and solar, you know, we should, okay. But you're saying that's not going to save us. That's not going to save us at all. And we need to find a more energy dense solution.
Yeah.
And you just brought up nuclear. Mm-hmm. And you know, I think in talking to you earlier, you have 5 important points or issues associated with. Are you ready? Want to chat with us?
Sure. We can talk a little bit more about the nuclear power. Well, it has a great history also. You know, the thing is, if I look at countries or states that have really decarbonized the system, that's the important message, right? We need to decarbonize our energy system. We need energy, but we need to produce energy cleanly, no carbon dioxide. And if I look at where that has been achieved to any significant extent, it's been in Sweden, it's been in France, in Ontario. But there's also a counter-example that we have wonderful, which is thanks to Germany. You know, they went through a big Energiewende program that it had about now more than a decade, I think, since they have been working on it, and we also did the experiment of what happens when they turned off the nuclear. So in Germany, the emissions were going down for several years, but then once they turned the things off, it flattened off or they started to go up.
I want to think about that for a moment. So, Germans are known for their precision, their coal mines, their steel, and a lot of things. And are you saying there was a phase occurred where they started implementing a tremendous number of windmills and encouraging factories for solar, and at that point greenhouse gas emissions increased?
They kind of flattened. They were on their way, because they were doing other things also that were bringing their emissions down. So, but it hasn't. Now they spent 550 billion euros on it. Had they spent that money on putting nuclear power plants, they would be 100% self-sufficient, and also more electricity production that they could be converting their transportation system into they would have been electrifying their transportation system significantly. Same thing with California. We have spent more than $100 billion on this. We could be getting a lot more clean energy had we invested those things in.
$100 billion on windmills? Solar?
All kinds of things, all kinds of the energy, the climate action things that we have been doing.
And offhand, do you remember what emissions are per capita for the state of California? Remember offhand?
Offhand. Well, I can tell you that offhand, California's, per kilo, well, not the per capita, but I can tell you, then we can calculate the numbers if you want. I mentioned France and Sweden, So per kilowatt hour, the carbon dioxide that they emit is like 60 grams or 20 grams for Sweden. Sweden is not even better than France. It just happened. But compare those numbers with what the global numbers are, which are like, from coal power plants, it's about a kilogram per. So 1,000 grams. From natural gas, it's about 500 grams, roughly. California is about 400 or so, or 300. That's where we are sitting. Maybe a little less, but it's about that. So the hundreds versus 20.
Yeah.
Big. So this is how it has done. Germany also hasn't gone below that. Germany is also around 400, 500, grams per kilowatt hour.
All right.
And we need terawatt hours, hundreds of terawatt hours.
Yeah. I just wanted to say something about California vis-a-vis the French, and I think California's emissions per capita are like that. I forget the exact number. I don't want to speculate. France is half. Yeah. And that surprised me when I discovered that, because
well, that's actually most of the U.S. and Europe is about half, and Japan is about half of the U.S.
Yeah.
In California, maybe a little better than the average, but not a whole lot.
Yeah. So I was dealing with per capita.
Per capita. That's the per capita energy consumption. Right. How do we get ourselves out of it?
Yes. How do we get
ourselves out of it? So going nuclear in a big way is the thing, but to do that, we have to really educate. And your show over here, and I think you'll be doing some more, are absolutely important in educating the public, addressing their fears, which is something we don't have time, but you will probably do another show on that. In the meantime, we need to stop closing down good, well-functioning nuclear power plants. That's the number one thing. Stop that. That's sheer madness. We are already short of electricity, clean electricity. Why are we shutting down good running nuclear power plants? Second, expand it. Where there are standard designs, just build. Don't wait for these second generation reactors that we have throughout the world. They have a tremendously safe record. It's the safest, it's the cleanest. And the third is then continue our R&D with maybe the next generation ones, which are even better and have potential for really using up the weapons and all the others that nuclear materials that are sitting around, the waste, and be able to use that as the fuel for the future.
Okay.
So these are a few steps that we should be able to take.
All right. Would you just repeat each one, but as a bullet point? Yeah, well, be sure we get this.
Stop closing nuclear power plants. That's number one. Stop closing. Number two, start building. Now, Korea and China and India, they are building. We are not, but they are building plants, and the costs are coming down over there. And and do the R&D that is needed for the next generations.
All right. I'm just going to say my guest has been Ripudaman Malhotra, and you're the president of Malhotra Consulting Company. You got books, you got all sorts of things. Thank you for being here. Now I want to make an announcement. On June 21 at Stanford, Stanford will produce the Silicon Valley Energy Summit 2019 for about the 7th or 8th year in a row. I hope you get to go to it, and I'm pleased to announce that Stanford will feature my painting called California's Smart Energy Solution. It's a 15 by 6 foot painting. They're going to feature it at the event. Thank you. I'm Michael Killen.
Thank you.